Welcome to Confessions of an Implementer, a podcast by Talent Harbor. We share unique stories of implementers and the companies they've transformed to give you a rare glimpse into the successes and the challenges of the system in action. I'm your host, Ryan Hogan. Let's jump in. Welcome to another episode of Confessions of an EOS Implementer, brought to you by Talent Harbor. Today, we are thrilled to welcome Randy, an experienced business leader and certified EOS implementer. We just had a great conversation, and like Randy will tell you, his entrepreneurial journey began in high school. And over the last 2 decades, he's bootstrapped a graphic design company to 4 locations. He's co-founded ventures across 7 different industries, one including the Astrodome, and leading a redevelopment project. And he's now dedicating his time to helping business owners and carrying all that knowledge and putting it forward and helping companies achieve their goals. I hope you enjoy. We also talked about the owner's box and the accountability chart, and how the owner's box fits into the accountability chart and effective ways to influence an organization from the owner's box. So hope you enjoy and enjoy the show. Today, I'm really excited about this conversation because we talked about so many things during our kind of discovery call or pre-call leading up to this. And like, your story was incredible. And it starts with like you thinking you're going down one path, going down another path, moving, coming back, Astrodome. So let's walk through a little bit of your journey that led you to this point of EOS.
And I'm trying to remember which path you might be recalling. Give me a hint if there's a place to start, or should I just kind of make up a fresh set?
Make up a fresh set, and just like, how did this all start for you?
Well, it all depends on how you find this, but I kind of the entrepreneurial side was just becoming aware in high school that I could make a lot more money in a lot less time, and just have a lot of fun. I started washing windows. It was just real simple, and it got pretty involved real quick. And it's funny, I remember I did a really big bid, for an 18-year-old. I was 17 or maybe 17. I did this. It was a huge bid. I would have found myself extremely rich, and if I had gotten that, I probably would have changed my whole trajectory, because I probably would have stayed in Austin and gone to the University of Texas. And because I think they were just nervous. They kind of liked everything, but they were nervous about a 17-year-old taking over. They gave the bid to somebody else, so I ended up going a couple hours away to Texas A&M, College Station, which is where I happen to live now. Met my wife. It changed everything just because of that one major bid that didn't come through. I was pretty optimistic about.
Did you have people that were working for you at that point, or were you doing all the window washing yourself?
That was part of it, is I would shift to not just me, but some others. And so was I ready for that? I'm sure I stuck a lot of things in life. I knew I was, but I'm sure I wasn't. So it was in that shift. I'd had bits and pieces of working with others on some projects. I didn't ever really have an employee or anything.
Got it. It's incredible how many journeys entrepreneurial journeys start in like the high school days or the younger days, where it's just like discovery and this openness to, like, your mind is blown of, we can create value in this world.
Yeah. And I think I still am blown away by the thought that it's fairly simple. It's not, and I don't mean to confuse that with easy. I don't think it's easy at all, but I think it's fairly simple. And so there's a little bit of, you can do this. You can walk up to somebody, say, hey, I'll do this for you on a regular basis, and you can trust me. And they do. And it actually works out. And they actually hand you money at the end of the day, whether you're 15 or whether you're, 65, whatever. It's just amazing how that happens.
And you wound up studying, were you studying accounting at A&M?
Yeah, it was a long, convoluted story with that. I literally, I think I took class in every college that they offered, and everything from psychology to, did a lot of pre-med stuff to, I still remember organic chemistry, and it just feels accidental that I ended up in accounting and so studied that, and actually got my degree from Alabama. I'm trying to remember if we've talked about that before.
Wait, so you started at A&M, but you got your degree from Alabama?
Yeah. So this makes it fun every year. Being, if you're familiar with the SEC, of just, there's often this kind of thing in me. I'm Aggie at heart. That's where first loyalties lie. I had a strong affiliation with Alabama, and it's a crazy story. I didn't get kicked out, just if anybody's wondering, but I did make a decision to do a campus church plant, basically in Alabama. It was a little bit loco. Greatly under-resourced and funded, a lot of enthusiasm. And it was kind of, I kind of look at like that and being like my second business kind of thing. Not that I treat it wasn't like a money-making business, but it was still a venture, and had a lot of enthusiasm and thought I was doing a lot of cool things. And I think in that process, also learned I had a lot of self and ego and all that going on in there. And long story short, I did what if my kids told me they were doing, I'd say, no, you're not. As I left interim when I had just a semester left for, some both good motives and selfish motives, but ended up going over there, seeing some really neat things happen, finished school. And because of that, made a couple of relationships with some professors who said, you got to get an MBA. And I think it really helped me. So I, in that process, got my CPA, then went back on my MBA, knew I didn't want to do taxes and audits. Not that I'm negative at all on that. I think there's a great place for that. And I love the background. Absolutely just fabulous background to have. But at the same time, I went into industry after that and just had a lot of fun, did some cool things.
And so what was you said it was some sort of church program?
Yeah, it's basically college campus church, and was with one here at Texas A&M. There was this, just a lot of expansion mind and visionary stuff, not just with this one, but there are, other churches around the country. And it was like, hey, let's go start a bunch of new ones. We don't need many resources, and we could just send these people out and they'll go out and do great stuff. And somebody said, you want to do that? I said, sure. It sounded fun, sounded exciting. Got there, and, again, I think we've already hit this at least once so far. I've had no idea what I was doing, and overly confident in myself, my own abilities, and all those different things. But had some really cool things and had some challenging things in that process, and did that.
Yep. The entrepreneurship, it's like you build the plane. Once you jump off the cliff, it's all about just kind of solving problems. It gets back to kind of that simplicity, simple but hard comment you spoke about earlier.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so now you've graduated, and you've got your both CPA and MBA, and you said industry started calling you at that point.
Yeah, I went from there. It was kind of interesting. I had some offers from IBM and Kimberly-Clark, which both were like the thing back in that day. They were the kind of the ideal offers. And also talked about, I'd written a proposal for starting a business and talked with the guy who I partnered with on that about doing that, and then ended up going kind of a medium-sized manufacturer that was still owned by a family, and kind of in the middle. Didn't go with either one of those, and did that for a few years. And just, I liked the idea of being able to make a huge difference in the organization. And I think with those really big companies, would have been great. It just felt like, and being one of, thousands, literally. And so I had multiple things going on in life, looking back at that decision, but had a great experience. It was fun because and there was a group of us that made a huge difference at that company and made a huge difference in the lives of the employees. And I remember I had the title of controller, but I really did more programming than controlling. And one of the most fun stories I had in that was, this is back in the late 80s, early 90s. And we had barcoded everything and had terminals out on the shop floor, and people were laughing at me for my money putting terminals out there. And people who could not speak English, some spoke Vietnamese, some spoke Spanish, and then a few other languages. People were laughing that you'll never get these people to actually use those terminals. They loved it. I mean, it was kind of like they were all being recognized that we can do this stuff. It took some training. Things didn't always work right, but we got to the point where everything was being tracked using MRP, MRP2. Those are old terms that, people may not know anymore, but we're using those things. And I'll never forget the day when I think it was Heil Quaker or Whirlpool, I can't remember. They were going to fly a plane down because some of our parts weren't right. And it was going to be just this huge cost. There was charges for the plane being down every hour until they could fly the new parts back up. And we, because of this system and the people who had been using the system, we were able to track exactly what happened. And in less than an hour, you had their plant back up online running just by telling them, put all these boxes aside and use these boxes. And that would have never happened. Today that's more common, but back in those days, it was shocking to people that all this crazy stuff we were doing actually was working. So it was just a fun time in my life. And I'll never forget that particular moment. It just putting the processes and the systems and then bringing some technology really changed the companies, but it also really changed for the employees that they were seeing what they were doing is making a big difference.
We had rolled out a warehouse management software at Hunt to Killer at one point, and it used barcodes. And essentially what you had to do is when you took something out of a box, you had to scan it with the barcode. We had quite a few issues because a lot of our SKUs were pieces of paper that had to go into some sort of binder, and then that would become what's known as the case file inside of whatever episode that was. And I remember when we rolled out the WMS system, nobody wanted to use it. The adoption on it was incredibly low. And so how did you deal with those types of challenges?
Some of it was just persistence and obnoxious insistence. So there's definitely some of that in there. And I'm sure I crossed some lines in that at times. And, part of it though was just selling. Part of it was getting out the floor and sweating with it, the other people and actually using the system. I think the guy I replaced, who was 20 years my senior, way more quote qualified than I was. Somebody said, well, he never really did anything, but he'd step out the door with his coffee, look around for 30 seconds and go back inside for the rest of the day. And I would spend sometimes my entire day on the floor working alongside them and just asking questions, but, a lot of dumb questions, and also asking what their frustrations were, what really made it difficult, just doing different things that helped us to identify. I've been recently working on some things related to data, which is the EOS term. And with that, identifying what's the root thing to measure. We identified, because we were doing air conditioning parts, we identified that it was this one degreaser and that drove everything. So it just really changed the whole mentality. We adjusted lunches, we gave people flex hours, we had special shifts, and that gave us the best record year that company had ever had up to that point. And obviously not just me doing it. It was just where I was working with the sales folks, with the leaders in the operational area, and it was just fun. It's funny tying this back to what I do at teams now. It was because the relationships were working. We didn't always get along, but because the relationships were working, because we could talk about, most anything, especially about 5 of us, we were able to just work through all those things. And because of that, we had a more unified message out on the shop floor. Once the 5 of us got on the same page, and people started connecting and saying, okay, this really matters, and get that going. It was fun. If you can't tell, it just gets, and I don't think about these things that often these days, but it was just a great time of life.
Yeah. And that's what strikes me through that story is there was a deep understanding of what was driving and what was motivating the team, individuals, getting to know people on a personal level. And because when you talk about things like flexible work and rearranging lunches, those are kind of 2020 topics right now. And back in the early 2000s, and we might be talking earlier than that, these things were not common conversations. So the fact that you were providing those types of benefits is pretty innovative in those days.
Well, thanks. I'll take that as a compliment. Yeah, it was a long time ago. I'm not sure if you were born at that point or not, Ryan, but that was a while back.
Yeah. And it reminds me of one of the ways we tried to get the team on Slack. So this was probably like 2016. A Hunt to Killer was, we were sending too many emails and we were kind of disrupting people too much. And so we implemented Slack, which was a communication or is a communication software. People didn't want to use it. And so one of the things that we did was like we started like events inside of Slack, like Monday joke day and Tuesday this day and Wednesday this day. And like if people wanted to be in on whatever the joke was or whatever was happening that day, it kind of helped guide them to Slack. But all of these different things of like listening to people and just finding better ways to connect and communicate is instrumental.
I'm writing that down. I love doing that specific. So I'm going to somehow use that in somewhere.
It's just about like how can you plant the seed where it doesn't seem daunting? Because the biggest feedback that we were getting is like, well, now we've got another software that we've got to use. Like now we've got email, we've got text messages, we've got phones, like we have all these different things, and you just want to do this other. And it's like, well, no, we want to remove all those other things and just communicate directly in Slack when we need to. But sometimes it's hard to kind of bridge that gap without like showing people how it works. Okay, so where did you go after this amazing gig?
It was fun. We had a couple of kids during that process, and then my wife tells you how amazing she is. She was 8 months pregnant with our third child. So the way I say it is I quit a perfectly good paying job to move several states away I was in Texas again, and then move over to Atlanta and start this business that I mentioned earlier. We kind of done the planning for, and we moved when she was 8 months pregnant and went from having a good salary at that point to having absolutely no salary, and getting this business off the ground and kind of bootstrapping it up in the graphics and printing area. And that was when the entrepreneurial part got really serious in terms of, we had this indelible memory of getting up one day after, I don't know, it was a year or two into it. Every dime we had was about gone, except for I grabbed the last bit of papers going into the office and had to make payroll that day and wasn't sure what was going to happen. And it was just then when the mail came, a check from our biggest customer came that day. So just barely had enough to do that. And it was kind of like one of those, I don't know what you call it, kind of the bottom of the trough. Things really better from there, and able to grow a lot and see a lot of great things happen. But went through some pretty gut-wrenching times in that process. And basically our whole approach was, how do we bring technology to a very mature, stable industry, just to take it to a whole nother level? And saw some really cool things happen with that. Focused on entrepreneurs in small businesses and that kind of thing. Actually surprised our approach brought in a lot of really large companies too, some Fortune 500s and well-known names at that time. So that was a lot of fun just doing that, growing that, having the ups and downs. We did have a fire in our production facility, it was actually a pretty stupid thing that a couple of employees did, with one plate with a lighter inside, which is absolutely not allowed, next to some flammable chemicals, and it turned into a huge flame. But amazingly enough, not really that much damage. Feared for some people's life for about 5 minutes, but all that, got through all those things and ended up selling to a national company and moving on from there.
God. And did you know what EOS was at this point, or was there EOS?
No, at that point, I think Gino was in his conceptual days of starting to put together. That was probably when he was probably just starting to really cobble together the tools and starting to have his clarity breaks at that point. I had a couple of mentors who had really helped me through some of those times, especially the challenging times, and they were teaching what really are the same things that Gino was digging into of different tools and disciplines of how do you really run a great company, really understanding the concepts of how do you have organizational structure, how do you really get the structure right, going back to Gerber and E-Myth, and his great work there. And then how do you do strategic planning and putting together, which honestly, a lot of it ties really closely to EOS. And so I actually I took those things as I loved them so much. And after we sold that company, I did some things in telecom right during the telecom bust. And that was fun. But kind of with that, started having these sessions with people on my own. And still EOS wasn't out there in the world yet. And through that process, I kind of tongue-in-cheek call it the Randy operating system. And nobody really said that. It was just kind of me and talking to people. And so I started doing that and saw some real success with a few teams. One in particular that saw great success, not just because of what I did, but I played one small part. And as a result of the relationship I developed there, when the founder sold his shares to the private equity, he took the proceeds and sat down with me and said, hey, I want to start a new company, use these proceeds, and asked me to be a co-founder and join with a new set of ventures that he mentioned, the Astrodome. That was one. We had 7 different things ranging from aviation fueling to R&D and contracts with the federal government, some real estate, some data center co-location. And we also somehow ended up in this crazy scheme to renovate the Astrodome, basically like a Gaylord type experience. And that was fascinating because we, in that process, I met some amazing people in there, but really learned there's some big business things happening out there. A lot of politics beyond what I'll ever understand. But we actually put together a package ready to go. And I think if it hadn't been for the 2008 financial meltdown, we would have had a shot. But then that combined with the politics of a public icon, with this historical impact, it just all fell apart. It just never made sense to try to go back and redo that. They're still trying to figure out. It's kind of sad. And it's costing a ton of money for taxpayers. I know when we were looking at it, it was costing about $10 to $12 million a year is my best memory of those numbers. I'm not sure if that's exactly right, but I'm sure it's costing more just to sit there now. But anyway, I learned more lessons in that. Really in all these, I've learned so many lessons each step of the way on doing that.
And so this next business you got into was you became a co-founder, and then it sounds like there was a whole bunch of different things. Like what was the genesis? What was like the kernel of the idea to start it before you guys started getting into all that amazing stuff?
I think the idea was having seen some success in some business ventures and also having, particularly with my partner who was the financial source of it, just wanting to invest and build a diversified holding company with independent business units that would operate. Yeah, I think the idea, and then just kind of build this recurring wealth generation machine, if you will, of being able to do really great and exciting work to help people at the same time, making money on similar to what we talked about in EOS Live, but doing what you love with people you love, being appropriately compensated, making a huge difference in time for other passions. We didn't call it that, but that really is the idea behind it. Making a huge difference in the world and pretty successful, really able to help out a lot of people on the way and continually learning lessons in that.
Got it. And it was the strategy every time there was kind of a new business or new idea, was it like, let's go acquire this, or was it, let's start it from scratch and this will be kind of an independent thing in the holdco?
So it's yes to both of those. There was some acquisition in that. There's also some start from scratch in that. And so kind of saw both of those, of what those were like. And then there were some, in there, there's also this acquire / totally, I don't know if revolutionize the concept, but really do a completely different scale than what was being done, using that as kind of the seed. So it was just flat, start from scratch and, put things together. So it was a mix.
And then were you, because it sounds like in a lot of these different instances, you're almost playing like an integrator role. Has that been where you found that sweet spot?
Yeah, I definitely played an integrator role in a lot of those. And And some of that I think was really helpful and needed. I also sat in the CFO seat in that. And so honestly, I think there's also some control features going on. Me wanting to make sure everything was done right. Kind of the partners I had there appreciated me sometimes making it done right. And sometimes, maybe not so much with that control feature. So there's the really positive of that. Let's make sure everything is done right. We're watching all the pennies and doing things right. And I was very personally going back to kind of the manufacturing company from years before. I was very operationally aware, and it wasn't just a numbers thing to me. But also one thing I realized at some point is to really make this run well, each business unit, and I didn't know the word integrator at that time. I was probably maybe hearing it, but not quite. But each business unit we had needed to be run completely on its own. And so you can't have the control. That's the idea of holding. And that was a great lesson for me. And I think for several of us, in some ways I was more explicitly doing that. I think there was a lot of that need for releasing each business unit to have, at a minimum, its own integrator, if not its own visionary and integrator, and to really get them some freedom. And I started learning a lot about the corporate governance in that process too, of how do you set the ends and the objectives, and then also how do you have the constraints and limitations clearly defined for each of them, which makes their life easier and makes kind of our lives easier, my life easier in that process. And we saw a lot of success by doing that, just by freeing people to run, run, knowing where the lines were. And one of the great moments was when one of the business unit leaders looked at me and suddenly he had like this shock on his face, said, "Oh no, I'm thinking like Randy." And we both laughed, because the reality was we were, instead of kind of coming together and smashing heads, trying to figure out what to do, we were coming together and able to run alongside each other and really work well together. And I was able to step back into, for lack of a better term, more of a governance type, and even mentoring, and less so of, I'm going to get in here and control every single thing.
And when you think about how you had these structured, is it almost like if you were building an accountability chart, and the accountability chart had the owner's box, like some do, would you almost consider that the holdco kind of sat in the owner's box, and the accountability chart was kind of independent for each of the portcos?
That's absolutely what it is. Yeah, and I think that's where it really began to kind of click, is to operate more as a board, owner's box / board, and give real freedom for the accountability chart for each one. That's where things really went well. That's where people both, I think we saw more happen, but also people started enjoying a lot more. I certainly did, because I just was not so much having to carry on my plate.
Yeah. And what, where did you find the fine balance? Because what's really interesting about this is I think there are companies, a lot of companies out there that struggle with like an owner that's kind of 1 foot in, 1 foot out. And maybe they want to be in the owner's box, but they don't really know how to effectively, whether it's lead, whether it's manage. I don't know what word you would use. Influence is maybe some of the best words, guardrails. But like, what are some of the tactics or strategies that worked really well, being able to provide that influence without getting hands-on?
Well, I will say, I think it's always a struggle. I wouldn't say we got it perfect, and I didn't get it perfect every time. But one of the things, I started becoming aware of some of the EOS tools, and I kind of got it in bits and pieces. And in fact, there's the People book that just came out from EOS in the last couple of months. I made it in there for the first time that I heard about the People Analyzer, and somebody this is in one of the business units, gave me a minus where, and that's where I actually had needed to step out more. But it was about creativity, is what they gave me a minus, which I'm fanatical about being creative. I really feel like it's one of my great gifts, superpower. But yeah, I realized I was not, and that's what made in the People book, is I was not being creative with this one particular person. In fact, not just this one, but several people. With others, I was hugely creative. I think that tied to that control feature and trying to hang on to control with things. but it also tied to once we really set up, hey, this is what the objectives you must meet, and these are the limitations you cannot cross. And we were all clear. It took away so many discussions and meetings. It said, as long as all your decisions are based on that, and there's a guy, John Carver, who I'm pulling from a book, Corporate Boards at Add Value, I think is the name of it. He lays it out really nicely. It's not the most exciting book I've ever read, but it's really valuable. And once we really implemented that, we could have meetings either once a month or once every 2 months, and just in a couple hours really cover everything we needed to, and then basically just hands off and walk away. That was hugely helpful. And in the intro times, when I would get asked to participate in things or be involved in things, I could just relax about all this big stuff, knowing that's going to be covered at the month. There's a time and a place to handle it. And so we were starting to kind of live out the idea of the owner's box that we teach in EOS world. Started to really live it out and operate with that, and not be both owner, employee, leadership team member. And in some cases, I became purely owner/board. I was not part of the leadership team at all. In other business units, I did have responsibilities as a leadership team member, if that case.
And when you think about kind of the influencer or helping portcos or sitting, we don't even have to say the portfolio companies, like this is truly like an owner's box versus, with the team that's inside of the company operating. What things should be influenced? And what I mean by that is, I'm sure you're not in there making sure that they're doing the right to-dos on a weekly basis. But like, does it make sense to get in before a quarterly pulse has happened to make sure that they understand maybe what the priorities are? Or is this like heavy influence on the annual or yearly goals? Or is it 3-year? Like, how do you figure out like where to really kind of exude that influence and where to let that team roll?
I think it kind of depends on the team and the situation. And part of that is the maturity and development of the team at that particular point in time. Part of it is how clear the objectives and goals, and then understanding the situation. Are we in hey, we all know what the plan is over the next 12 months, and now it's just heads down and let's focus, and we're just doing this as a check-in. And versus sometimes there's things are causing the world to turn upside down in a particular moment. And in that case, then there's more active involvement. And I don't think there's a one size fits all, but I do think that the key things are the relationships there, that there's real trust to actually have the honest conversations when you get together every month or every 2 months or every quarter. And then second is, do we really have clarity that everybody's completely singing out of the same songbook and even same word and same note at the same time? I think if those are in place, that can be hugely beneficial, because the trust is what allows it to be, instead of combative, it allows it to be, we're going to attack the issue together and the same side of the table instead of from opposite sides. And the clarity in where we're going eliminates all that back and forth conversation that things are confusing. And in that, you have to have your interest aligned. It has to be the win-win-win. I know that could sound cliche, but that seems so critical to me.
When you think about like what teams to engage, interact, have conversations with, like if someone's sitting in the owner box, should they really be focused on building that trust, building that relationship, and only engaging with the visionary or with the visionary and integrator? Or do you think it's appropriate that they can engage with the entire senior leadership team?
Typically, and there might be exceptions to this, but the vast majority of the time, it's I'm here, I'm available to be engaged, but only at the request of the integrator and visionary. That I'm not ever going to step in because it's needed, but it's when they say, hey, really want you to come in. Sometimes that's for a particular issue that there might be an expertise in of one of the owners, or sometimes there's relationships that the owners can really step in and help out. Different things like that. It's really at the beck and call of the integrator and visionary. Whereas in most companies, it's the opposite. It's more integrator and visionary having to operate at the beck and call of the owners. And that's where I think it really gets upside down and backwards. That also starts to eliminate accountability, because the visionary and integrator are just going, we can't help it. This owner or owners keep meddling. They stick their nose in. They're having these conversations with people, asking questions that are creating all sorts of havoc and chaos in the organization.
Interesting. Motivating people, getting them inspired, like you can do a lot with words and where's the company going and direction, things like that. Generally, when you get to the leadership team level, it's both words and some sort of compensation. And so like when you have a team and you're sitting in the owner's box, like what have you seen as far as like the best structures in order to get that team either fully performing, fully optimized, or maybe the word is fully aligned with like where both the owners are trying to take it and making sure that the company is meeting those expectations?
There's two totally different questions there. One, and at least in my mind, maybe more, but one is all about the vision of the organization, and the other is about the compensation of it. And in some ways, the compensation side is simpler. That's simple, not necessarily easy. I'm a big believer in making sure that the compensation is based on the total results, not individual word. Sometimes I see situations where there's bonus structure and things like that based on individual areas. And I don't find that to be as helpful. And there's some great tools out there and books out there just are really simple about how to put that together for the organization. But I think it's getting everybody to win together and lose together and feel the joy of the victory together really at the same time, and then feel the pain of the loss. The harder part is getting that complete clarity on the vision. And this goes to the BTO, Vision Traction Organizer. How do you really bring it to the ground? Everybody's clear on what it is. And then in EOS, we talk about the 8 questions being answered and shared by all. And that shared by all is crazy difficult, in my opinion. That's one of the most challenging things to do. Simplest, but also most difficult is how can you get everybody to actually share it? And the way I work with leadership teams is that that's not just telling them, although that's a good start. And it's not just them hearing it, which we teach they have to hear it 7 times before they even hear it the first time. But it's them actually getting to the point where every day I wake up, and not just because it's Ryan's vision and not because it's just the leadership team, but every person in the company says, this is mine and I own it. That's the shared by all. And this is what I go to day in and day out, week in and week out to make my decisions. And it just changes the whole dynamic of the structure. And to do that, you first got to get the leadership team doing that. If your compensation, jumping back to that side, isn't fully aligned, that's just really more of a flag of dissonance going on in the organization. They don't share that. It's not really the source. And I think most people tend to focus on that compensation, as opposed to saying the compensation is just cements and reaffirms what we've all committed to in the organization or where we really want to go as a team. Honestly, every leadership team, that's one of their biggest things every 90 days to come back together. And then on an annual basis to come together and make sure they totally are seeing that same future. They are totally buying in at a very individual, personal, passionate level, but also as a team. And then saying it, that's another big part of it is, are they even saying it the same way and communicating the same way? I mean, I'm sitting there thinking about it. I get really excited about this because this is crazy simple and crazy hard for teams to do.
How did you become an EOS implementer? So you an amazing journey, and then getting into kind of private equity-ish portfolio, and then now an EOS implementer. Like so much experience bringing it over, but what made you want to become an EOS implementer?
In some ways, I think it was kind of the yearning of my heart throughout the journey. Coming back, it was just always there. I remember being in my early 20s and helping people out just for fun. And I don't know if I was always helpful, but I enjoyed that process. And then, kind of going through with the mentors I mentioned earlier that had taught me some of these things. When I had sold my shares in this last business we were talking about. And I took some desperately needed time off with my wife. There was definitely some marriage areas we were working on and just building. When you talk about marriage areas, so you immediately have to say, it means I have stuff in here that needed transformation and I needed to work on. So I spent some time doing that. Also spent some great time travel. It's somewhere after 9 months of this, Abigail looks at me and says, "You've got to find something to do with all your creative energy because you'll drive me crazy." And so I was kind of dabbling. People, I wasn't really making any effort, but people were calling me occasionally to do stuff, and talking to a guy it was on a Valentine's Day at a party. And he said, "Now, what are you doing?" This is somebody who had been a client of one of our companies. And I told him, I said, I just a little bit of this. And he said, "Randy, you've got to be this EOS implementer." And he had been working with an EOS implementer, and I had known about EOS, and literally it was just like blinding flash of the obvious. The sky, the clouds parted, just so clear to me. I would absolutely love to do this every day for the rest of my life. And driving home from that party, I just mentioned it to Abigail, and she looked at me in the car and she said, "That's what God created you to do." And it was almost like the fastest business decision we've ever made. Looked it up, signed up, here, just loving working with clients.
That's incredible. And so you're in College Station now, correct? Do you look for local clients? Are you niche driven, or do you travel? Like, what's your ideal client?
I'd say any of those except for the travel. And I'm not totally unwilling to travel, but I make my best attempts not to. We built a building that's EOS focused. It has some great session rooms, and also rent out part of the building to some other people. But it's just a short ways from my house. And part of it is my joy of what I'm doing personally right now, of just being able to really live life, enjoy really continuing to build and work on my marriage, sometimes successfully, sometimes less so. That's a whole other story we can talk about. But in doing that, I really find a lot of life is about energy. We talk about it's just money's that scarce resource, and as we get older, time. But I'm really more and more convinced the most scarce resource I have is energy, and what I really bring for my clients. And I've got a pretty mellow exterior, and when I talk, but still I have a huge amount of energy, and I just got to protect that. And so the challenge with travel is it just takes a lot of energy in that. And I love to travel, and I love to travel for family things as well as Abigail and I. But usually I'm just focused on, if we can be in that session room, I can bring the max energy for a team. So that's really where I focus. In terms of industry, I love the cross industry. It fits everything I've been talking about. I have not been industry specific, and for decades now, I've been working in multiple industries in the same day. And certainly with EOS, it's, I work with one company one day and totally different industry another day. And that works great for me. I just absolutely love it. That I'm able to carry the things that cross industries, and then also their specifics that I'm just constantly learning from my clients. I love that. I have a mix. I have companies here in College Station that I work with. I have a number of companies that will either fly in or drive in to meet here, and that works great with them. That's really what I'm focused on doing and enjoying that.
That's great. It's interesting when you talked about like travel and energy. And there was a time, I used to fly back and forth from coast to coast and wake up and just get right to it. But I've noticed over the last 3 or 4 years that it takes a lot to travel. And then you're getting adjusted to the time zone. And so most recently, I am now trying to minimize my travel because I think there's just a lot of wasted energy that goes into that. So second to last question. So someone has listened to this and they're either in or around the College Station, or they're like, I have to have Randy, and we will travel every quarter, every year to come see him. How would they get a hold of you?
Well, the simplest way is phone 979-574-4571, or email me. It's randy.mcdougal@eosworldwide.com. And you can, I guess, Google me also, EOS Implementer. That works as well.
And then last question is, if you could have lunch, a beer, a glass of wine, beverage of your choice with any EOS implementer, who would it be?
Any EOS implementer. Man, that's a tough one because there's a ton of them that I love doing that with. There's Richard Price comes to my mind. He's a great guy. I always love getting to visit with Richard. I don't know. The list just goes on and on. Ken DeWitt was one of the first ones I ever talked to. A guy out of Alabama. He was great to be with. I feel like I'm over a barrel on this one because I can think of dozens of names. There's Jeremy McCliver has been great on the journey. Just tons of them.
That's awesome. Thank you so much for coming on the show. I learned so much. I've got a whole page of notes at this point, and like one of the things that really sticks out to me through our conversation is truly how to operate effectively from the owner's box. Because I've heard this theory quite a bit, but I've never had a conversation where we've explored it in detail. And I think there's just so much tactical advice that came from this conversation. And it frankly, like, it doesn't have to be a portfolio company. It doesn't have to be a franchise. It could just be an owner that's like sitting in the owner box trying to figure out how to effectively make sure that his or her company continues to grow. And so I just wanted to thank you for coming on and dropping the knowledge.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Ryan. It's been very fun to talk.
Thanks.
Confessions of an Implementer is brought to you by Talent Harbor. To find out more about Talent Harbor and our fractional services and talent search solutions for businesses, visit talentharbor.com. And then make sure to search for Confessions of an Implementer in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Google Podcasts, or anywhere else podcasts are found. Make sure to click subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. And on behalf of the team here at Talent Harbor, thanks for listening.